Hi everyone, I have a lot of things that I want to try to talk about today, but I want to start with this comment over here by Ellie Doby, 1975. And this was a really amazing comment. This is really amazing insight. It's something I had never thought about before. But I just want to thank her for making this comment because for me, this really helped to clarify everything that God has been describing in the Bible. It just really solidified it for me and helped me to really understand what everything represents. And I'm going to go ahead and read the comment. She's saying here, I'm not sure if you've discussed this, but a few months ago I was led to understand that olives represent female eggs and figs represent male sperm. This is interesting with all the talk of these two things in the Bible and the fig trees and the olive trees. And you can read my response over here, but this is what I'm going to try to elaborate on in this video. But first I want to go back to the third day and talking about all the examples that Pastor Sandy gave in this video of the third day, and I want to continue explaining why I believe all those examples had something to do with DNA. Of course, that's not what he was talking about in the video. He was strictly just talking about the third day and the year 2017. But I wanted to continue showing how all of those examples, from what I'm seeing, had something to do with DNA. And I realize that he's made some more recent, very excellent videos since this video, but this is just something that I really wanted to finish talking about. Okay, now some of these examples I've already gone over, and I put some of these verses over here, but what I wanted to point out is that you can tell, even by looking at these numbers, that a lot of these verses, a lot of these scriptures have something to do with DNA, and of course I believe the number 17 has to do with the year that all of this is going to take place. But starting with Hosea 6, 2 through 4, this is one that I've already been over, but when you look at verse 4, where this verse culminates, you see that you have the number 46 backwards. Okay, and I'll just read the scripture really quick. It says, Come and let us turn unto the Lord, for he hath torn, and he will heal us. He hath smitten, he will bind us up. After 2 days he will revive us, and the third day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. Then we shall know, if we follow on to the Lord, his going forth is prepared as the morning, and he shall come unto us as the rain, as the latter and former rain unto the earth. O Ephraim, what shall I do unto thee? O Judah, what shall I do unto thee? For your goodness is as a morning cloud, and as the early dew it goeth away. And I've explained before how Ephraim and Judah, or Ephraim and Manasseh, sometimes they're referred to as Ephraim and Judah, refer to the two types of DNA. That's what I'm seeing in the scriptures, and it's referring to the restoration of our DNA, and I've explained that in other videos, so I'm not going to explain it again, but I just want to point out that they're both mentioned right here in verse 4. So you have Hosea 6:4, which backwards is 46. Okay, and there's 46 chromosomes in a human body. As you can see here, in humans, each cell normally contains 23 pairs of chromosomes for a total of 46. 22 of these pairs, called autosomes, look the same in both males and females, so they're twins. So you have 22 that are twins, and then there are the autosomes because they look alike, and then the 23rd pair, the sex chromosome, differs between males and females. Females have 2 copies of the X chromosome, while males have 1 X and 1 Y. So this one is usually set apart because it may or may not be exactly the same depending on whether the person is male or female, but these 22 autosomes always match up like twins and look alike. Okay, so usually when you see the numbers 46 or 22 or 23 or 11 in the Bible, it usually has something to do with chromosomes. Okay, and the next one I had gone over was Luke 2:46, and this is when Mary and Joseph had gone to Jerusalem, and as they were heading back to Galilee, I believe it was, they realized that Jesus wasn't with them, and so they turned back, and then after 3 days, they found Jesus in the temple in the midst of the rabbis. So you see that here in verse 46. It says, and it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple. The temple represents our body. Our body is the temple of God. Sitting in the midst. So Jesus was in the midst. He was in between the two DNA strands, both hearing and asking them questions. And you see that comes up in verse 46. Okay, then you had John 2:2 as well as John 2:19 through 20. But when you go to John 2:20, you see you have the number 22 again. And then you had John 2:46. And all of these had to do with DNA. And I'll just pull that chapter back up. Okay, so this is John chapter 2, and this is where it talked about the marriage in Cana. It says here, and in the 3rd day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. So this is the marriage in Cana, and I talked about in my last video how the word Cana is a word that means sea of reeds, and then when you look at it more closely in the Hebrew, you see that it's actually a stream that divides the borders of Ephraim and Manasseh. So you have the stream in the middle, or the living water. Just like this image right here, this is Mount Horeb at Mount Sinai, and this is where Moses had struck the rock, and the rock split, and then water, or living water, came out of the mountain, which is what's going to happen to the Mount of Olives as well. You see that over here in verse 8. It says, and it shall be in that day that living water shall come forth from out of Jerusalem. And the living water is God. You can see that over here in Jeremiah 2:13. It says, for my people have committed 2 evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. And then in Jeremiah 17, it says, O Lord, the hope of Israel, all that forsake thee shall be ashamed. They shall depart from me and shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living waters. So God is the fountain of living waters. Over here in John 7, it says, he that believeth on me, as the scripture hath said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. And I mentioned before that the word for valley in the Greek, in Zechariah 14, where it talks about the valley of the mountain, that word also means belly or womb in the Greek. And then you see it again in Revelation 7:17. It says, for the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them, and shall lead them unto living fountains of waters. God shall wipe away all the tears from their eyes. So Jesus, or God, is the living water, and he's the one who's always in the midst. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to verses 19 through 20 in John 2. Okay, so over here in John 19 it says, Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then said the Jews, 46 years was this temple in building, and thou wilt rear it up in 3 days. So again, you have 46 mentioned here in relation to the temple, which is our body, and this is coming up in John 2:20. And so I'll just show it to you this way so you can see the number 22. So you see it's coming up in John 2:20, where it's talking about the 46 years and the temple of God, which is our body, and of course the 3rd day. Okay, this one over here was actually a mistake. There's no John 2:46, so I'm just going to delete that. And then over here, these weren't really about the 3rd day, but I just wanted to put these in here, and I can talk about these later. But these all have to do with the 2 sticks, the 2 olive trees, or the 2 candlesticks, or 2 staves, as it's talking about in Zechariah 11, and or Ephraim and Manasseh, or Ephraim and Judah, as it's talking about in Isaiah 11. And you have 4 because I believe this is a representation of the 2 becoming one. There's 4 altogether with the 2 candlesticks and the 2 olive trees, but the 2 become one, and that's why you have 2. But I believe it's also because of meiosis. During meiosis is when you have from one cell, instead of the cell dividing into 2 cells like it does in mitosis, it divides into 4 cells, which are gamete cells. And I believe that's why in the Garden of Eden you had the Euphrates River, and it branched out into 4 rivers. But that's something I could talk about in another video because I don't want to get off track. But then you have Zechariah 11:17, which is mentioned after that, and I just pulled that up to see what that was because I couldn't remember why I put that in there. But this is where it's talking about the Antichrist, so this could be a representation of the rise of the Antichrist. It's coming up in verse 17, and it says, Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock, the sword shall be upon his arm, and upon his right eye his arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. So as you can see, he's half and half over here, sort of like this image over here. And then I've talked before about how Zechariah 4:11 is a parallel to Revelation 11:4. They're both talking about the 4 items, which is the 2 candlesticks and the 2 olive trees, but it's really just 2, and that's because the 2 have become 1. And like I said, I believe the number 17 represents the year, and I've talked about how Ezekiel 37 is about the 2 sticks being joined together, and then Romans 11 is about the 2 olive trees, and both the Jews and the Gentiles partaking of the root and the fatness of the olive tree, and they both come up in verse 17. But what's interesting is that you also have Luke 17:37, which is 37:17 backwards. And over here it says, And they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? And he said unto him, Wheresoever the body is, thither will wherever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. And what I wanted to explain, this is actually a scripture that was quoted by Jonathan Kleck in one of the videos that he did recently, where he saw all the vultures in this park. But what I wanted to explain is that there's 2 suppers, and this is another 3rd day that I wanted to talk about. This is not one that Pastor Sandy mentioned, but it's another one that I found that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to talk about. But there's 2 suppers. One is the wedding supper of the Lamb, and the other one is the great supper of God. And it's interesting that that just so happens to come up in verse 17. But I'm going to have to continue explaining that in the next video. Thank you.